Hello everyone, so in the past week I've been practicing drawing my basic forms uh, and I didn't record some of them, but I realized I should try to record them and show you guys how I practiced. But the first thing I did was kind of like pinpoint the main points of what I needed to know uh, when drawing. So the first thing, basic forms, sphere, cylinder, cube, cone. And then the second part is really important, and I don't think I talked about much in my last video was drawing through the forms itself. So what drawing through helps with is, one, helps you add that volume, and two, it also helps you with spacing and knowing where an object would be, right? So if I added a cube right here, I know if I put it up to here, it's not touching the base of this sphere. So if I draw this, I know that it's not going to be touching the sphere, and it looks like it makes more sense. So it's not clipping through an object. And that also helps with when you want to draw things that clip through. So let's say here, this is a cube and a sphere, and they're separate. So I'll darken the front of the sphere. And so these are two separate objects. Now let's say I wanted to draw like a single object made of a cube and a sphere. So I'm going to draw out my circle. And then I'm drawing through as always, because it's a very important step. Basically showing how deep the sphere goes, basically. And now if I wanted to add a cube to this, let's say I wanted to clip. That's one thing that's important. So I'm going to put the back of my cube right here. And then the front will kind of come right around here. So I'll draw out the inside of my cube, the top, just so I have a plan for it. There we go. And I'm going to draw down. I'm going to draw the lines that kind of follow correctly. Oh, I think I did it a bit rough, but it works for now. Great. So now I have a sphere and a cube, and it looks like they're clipping through, which was my point in this. So I'm going to erase the inside of it just to lighten up the lines. And now I'm just going to draw out the front like here. And we know that the cube's top comes out here. And this is a part of the cylinder that comes through. Draw this down. I mean the sphere, sorry. Angle down for this. So I'm going to erase the lines that I don't need again. I think I want this line. I want this line up here. And I'm going to just continue that. And we know this is the front of the cube. So that's when they're clipping through and they're part of the same object. But that's also just the base of the head, right? So if I were to make this into a head, a person with a giant chin, I know where my cube started. And I'm going to go down, following through. And this is the chin. Yeah. So that's one important thing about drawing through. And that leads to my next point, which is combining basic forms to create new forms. So for example, on this cylinder, so I started off with a cylinder and I added the cone to make the top of this bottle. So this will be a cylinder. And this is a cone. And then another cylinder for the top right here. And this, there's two ways to think about it. When I drew it initially, I did it as a cylinder that goes down, right? So it's more rounded and it tapers off to a cube-like shape. That's why it goes straight. But Up until this point, it's in my head, I'm thinking of a bunch of cylinders that kind of flow to make a handle. And then for the cube, this one is pretty basic. The base was made from a cube. And the top, I took basically the shape of the cone, or just a triangle, and attached it to the top. So let's set that. I'll call it, it's a triangular prism. Triangular prism. And I drew it on top of the cube. If you can see here, you can see my baseline right there if it's visible. And then I added up the triangle by drawing through, continuing this line up to the top wherever I wanted the roof to end. And then I drew down the lines. And you can even see the inside part of me drawing through for the rest of the other side of the roof. And then for the sphere, or like this apple, I started with the sphere. Like you can see where the edges are. So SP. Started with the sphere, and I added more spheres basically. So if I were to draw through here, it would be this one, that. And that's our more spheres. And then the stem was made out of a cylinder that I altered to look like a stem. So using this, I basically started to draw my simple shapes and tried practicing by drawing a few other objects. These are from a book called the Famous Artist School. You can find it online. It teaches you basically the basics, and honestly, it's really good. I would recommend you guys find it. I'll try to link it in the description if I can find like the official, like the free one that I found. So for the dog, you can see here, I started with a sphere for the head, a cylinder that tapers out for the neck. I'll just write them down. Cylinder. And then another cylinder here. And this big, I drew a sphere, a large sphere for the chest area and the butt. And then for the legs, these are basically also just cylinders that taper in and out based on anatomy, but for now I'm just focusing on the basic forms. And then here's an easier one, which is a lamp on a table. The table I basically drew inside a giant cube, if you can see my guidelines right here. And I kind of cut out whenever I had to make the detail of like the under table part or the legs. I would cut into the cube, or how I'm thinking about it is the space between the top of the table and the under table is this distance. So I kind of just cut in and made sure on every side the cut kind of looked correct and the offset was right. So that's how I drew the table. And then the lamp was basically two spheres on top of each other right there, and then a cylinder in between, and a basic cone. And you could use this for basically anything. So these fruits I used a lot of drawing through to make sure that none of the objects looked like they're clipping through. So a sphere for the bowl and a cylinder for the bowl's lip. But the fruits, I made a lot of spheres and just made sure using drawing through that they weren't actually clipping. So this would be that one, and I would draw the apple like this. And I kind of cheated it a bit, but I know that these are not touching. And if I draw a cylinder, I know that's the closest it can go. And that's how you get your banana shape. So there. The shape of the banana. And here's just a tree stump I drew. I found like the reference on the Famous Artist School book that I found, but it's just basic cylinders, and this straight down part is just a plane. So you could just think of it as like a rectangle that you kind of just draw, and then you alter it down to make it look more organic. But using these methods, I was able to draw actually a lot of other things that I was practicing using. So like a turtle, even clouds you can use form with, like simplifying into cylinders and spheres and cubes. You can make like organic interesting looking clouds. This one, I was basically copying an image from a painting and just simplifying its shapes and shading it just to point out where the light's coming from, but just simplifying the shape. So this is like a train going through some mountains. I did some books, I did a person, and like this barn over here. This is probably my favorite one because for this truck over here, I used the drawing through and using simplified shapes, but what I realized was I wasn't thinking about proportions while I was drawing. So like this hood part looks way longer than it should be, and this is a bit higher than it should be, and these wheels just don't make sense. So for the barn, I really wanted to focus on proportions and try to make everything kind of look right, and like the scale of everything looks right. So that the barn basically is cubes and cylinders, and then a human being right here, drawn using spheres and cylinders mainly. And then last, I drew an elephant using a big sphere. So these few drawings near the end, I actually videotaped, and I'll be talking about them while I play the time lapse of them. So for the human, I started off with the sphere, if you can see, and then cylinders and spheres. Even the hair, I ended up doing cylinders to make it look more curly and match the reference a bit more. Arms and everything is just spheres and cylinders. You can see for the legs, I kind of tried to follow anatomy a little. The base is a cylinder, but I, pushed it out and pushed it in depending on the anatomy of the person. One thing I messed up here was the butt of the lady. It's not round enough. I made it into more like a box shape when I should have kind of tried to use a sphere to kind of make it more round and add that volume that should be there on the other side. Here I did a little bit of shading, just two different, so black and white, nothing extra. I have some really dark spots, but most of it is just two values, so black and white, or like gray and white, to just show depth and where the lighting is coming from, which is the way that we naturally see forms. It's mainly through light. We don't really see it through lines and things like that. And then this was the barn. I started off by adding my my plane where everything is supposed to sit in. I realized that the roof kind of hits into the truck, but I didn't mind that. I wanted to just continue drawing. So the barn is pretty simple, just cubes and cylinders, and using like the center point of the cube to find like where the roof line would go up, and just connecting the corners of the house with the roof middle, and you'll end up getting like a pretty normal in perspective type barn shape. I'm adding some details that were on my reference, and after a little bit I start shading, and even for this one, I used like 3 values. So in a few seconds, you'll see, so right here I start shading. So 1 value for the side where the light's not hitting, just to put it in shadow. And then the shadow of the barn itself, I made it darker, just so you could see the distinction between the ground and the objects that are standing up, right? And other than that, it's just basic shading. Under the roof, I made it a little darker. And then for the next drawing, this is where I started looking at more organic stuff. So for the turtle, I started with the sphere, but I widened out the horizontal line to kind of get like the volume of the shell. And then I kind of blended that in with the sphere itself. And then sticking out of that, I added my turtle head and the arms, which are basic cylinders with rounded ends. And the eyes, I used spheres and I kind of drew the eyelids around where the sphere turns, right? So I drew the eyelids following that line, like the contour. And then here's a little bit of shading and some small details. I made it dark at like inside under the shell, just to show the separation of objects in like this creature. And then the next one is I don't really remember. Oh, the books. I feel like the books are like the best thing to try drawing as a beginner, because it's just a bunch of cubes at a bunch of different angles. In this case, it's all stacked up, so I had to also follow perspective going up. You can see some areas where they're messed up, but because they're books, you kind of have some like freedom. Like if the pages are open or some of them are folded, it'll make the perspective of the book's covers a bit more open or not. And then you can see I'm just like basically drawing out all the dark lines and then shading out where the light wouldn't hit. Another thing I think I did, so I started adding more detail. So adding the thickness of the book covers itself to help like symbolize that it's a book. After that was the clouds, which you could see it's just a bunch of spheres and rectangular planes that I'm just rounding out at the ends. And I'm using the way I made the spheres for my lighting itself, right? So I add a sphere and then I just add a curve where I want my shadows. And then I just shade up the rest of it while making sure that the lighting makes sense from the view you're looking at it from. This, I copied an illustration and I just tried to simplify the forms itself. So you can see this is a train going through some mountains. So if you can see, like the mountains were way more detailed in the painting, but I simplified it into just cones that I'll just shade out to make it look more round. I feel like this is a really good practice, finding paintings you like from like the games, movies, or anything like that, and just like simplifying them into their basic forms, and like even adding the lighting that the director or whoever made the image put in. It can teach you a lot about like composition too at the same time. And finally, it's the elephant, which is made of spheres. I did a lot more shapes for the head. So like where the brow ridge of the elephant and the eyes are on this cylindrical shape. So I added that. The trunk is all cylinders. I feel like the top of the head should have been more like a cube, because I noticed that elephants have like their skulls are more like, you could notice that it's bone there and not like any hair or anything like that. And then the rest is just detailing. Cylinders for the feet, a big sphere for the body, and there's a little bump of where the spine is for the elephant, so I added that bump. You could consider that like a cylinder just going around the sphere, like on top of it, sitting on top. And then basic shading, 2 values, nothing special. But I just wanted to make sure like you could tell where the bottom is and the top is. And another thing when I do shading is I try to follow the forms that I'm drawing. So if you look at the bottom of the elephant, it's following that sphere that I made initially in my base drawing. And same for the neck and the legs. And the trunk, I used the shading to add more details. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Like, subscribe. And if you have any questions, always add a comment and I'll try to answer them. You'll find the book in the description below. Thanks.